Hello everybody out there in Formula One world, wherever you are on the planet Earth. Welcome to the live stream in the build-up to the final three races of 2025. As if you didn't know, Las Vegas this weekend. What a circuit. I'm trying to sound enthusiastic. Not many what I would call great corners at Vegas. Lots of straight line stuff, lots of corners that are flat, kinks. Well, flat if you got the car right and you know you're on a new set of tires, whatever. Perhaps on full tanks, perhaps with debris online. It's a different story. But anyway, fairly bland circuit. And then there's Vegas itself. I won't repeat what Carlos Reutemann always used to say about Vegas. Long before the 81 debacle in the race when he lost the championship in that final round, even though in effect he'd won it already by winning that South African Grand Prix, from which the points were then deleted a couple of months later. Can you imagine that happening today? Anyway, yeah, Carlos was never impressed with Vegas, and he certainly wasn't impressed after that race in 81. Yeah, well, I had a chat to Mark Slade, our friend here on the channel. Great race engineer, has won many races and championships over his career at Mercedes, McLaren, Renault, and Haas. Lots that he can give us mere mortals, I think. That's how I see race engineers. And I'm relying on Mark in my chat with him to get really enthusiastic about Vegas, because I always found it to be fairly sordid. And I can imagine now when they go back to the hotels at whatever it is, 3 a.m, and there's a smell of sort of cigarettes and other stuff in the lobbies, which are full, of course, of all those poker machines. I can imagine now it's much nicer, isn't it? Yeah, right. So I'm going to try and get Mark to get us all fired up about Vegas. And of course, there will be some fascinating technical aspects to it. So yeah, I did record this brief chat with Mark before the show. And we talk about Vegas mainly. But towards the end, I also asked him about the new email from Pirelli saying that for Qatar, they're going to limit the number of laps per set of tyres to 25 laps because of the damage that can be done to the tyres on that circuit. Now, 2 years ago, it was a similar limit at Qatar, mainly because of the knife-edgy curbs they have there. Those curbs have been modified, but now there's still a combination, as Mark will explain, of very fast corners and curbs, which still can do a lot of damage. So we talked to him about that limit and what that means for teams like McLaren, who have very good time management compared with the rest of us, compared with the rest of them. And then finally, right at the end of the chat, we go back to the old chestnut of the shunt in Brazil and more data that Mark has uncovered about the way Kimi Antonelli tried to control that restart from P2, having made a complete botch of it. Mark, into the last 3 rounds of the championship now, Las Vegas. Thoughts on Vegas? What's it like there in the new version of Vegas? And
yeah,
thoughts on the race, the circuit, the whole place?
So it's on the Strip, so the newer part of the city, I guess it is, just amongst all the high-rise buildings, and obviously there's the Sphere that's on all the time. It was pretty weird because we were very late at night that we were working. And it's also typically a quiet weekend for Vegas anyway, apparently last weekend before, is it Thanksgiving, I think, which I think is why they put the race on that weekend to try and drum up some interest. But so you tend to be leaving for the track sort of late afternoon. And obviously you go down the lobby of the hotel, everyone's in there playing at the machines. It's a bit strange, and then you walk into the track, and then from that point it's pretty basic. It's you're going through sort of yards and just pretty rough areas before you get to the paddock itself. The paddock's quite big, open expanse. Team hospitality on the left on a sort of raised area. First year they made the walkway too narrow in front of the building, so everyone was getting each other's way, but they made it wider last year. The pits are decent size. The track, they resurfaced the whole thing for the race when they started. Obviously there's the turn 1, 2, 3, 4 all on the land that F1 actually bought to build the pit complex, whereas the rest of it's actually the streets. It's very fast, so it's just a mixture of straights and pretty slow speed corners, apart from turn 3, 4, which is really one corner, and turn 6, which is a very high speed left-hander. But other than that, it's fairly slow corners but long straights, so you have to run a fairly low downforce level. And the grip level's not particularly high. And the biggest issue, or one of the big issues, is the temperature, because it's at night in November in Vegas. I think it's forecast to be around about 10 degrees centigrade this year for most of the sessions. I think the first year we were there, it was struggling to get above 7 or 8 degrees. And that means with the low energy from the circuit and the low downforce level and the low ambient temperatures, it's actually quite difficult to get the tyres working, even though they'll bring, I think it's the C3, 4 and 5, so the softer end of the range. So that's pretty tricky. The circuit, it's not a particularly interesting circuit from, it's no Interlagos, that's for sure, or Spa. But it's a fairly, is typical of sort of modern era street circuit, I suppose. And obviously not a lot of room for error. You'll hit a wall if you go too far offline, so that's okay. It's got a couple of curbs that the drivers have to negotiate, which adds a bit of interest to the sort of setup side of things. And it's hard on the tyres, actually. The right front gets a really hard time. We saw a lot of graining there the last couple of years, less so last year than the first year. And it's quite hard on the rears as well because of the traction requirement. So, yeah, it's quite a tricky track. I think it was 2 stops last year, wasn't it? Most people ran mediums and hards. And I think that's the wear of that right front and the rears is the problem. So it's not so much that the tyres are overheating and going off. It's more that they do wear out, and so you can't. It's a real struggle to do a one-stop race there.
You're talking about the time at which you get to the track. What sort of time zone do you keep in terms of your body clock then for Vegas?
When we worked it out in the first year that we were actually on Japanese time, effectively. So it's kind of neither one thing nor the other. I think this year last year they moved it a little bit earlier, and I think it's the same this year. But because I don't remember if you remember the first year, there was the issues with Science's car getting badly damaged in the first practice session. So P2 was delayed massively, and it was very, very late. And it was, you're getting back to the hotel when there's no one around apart from the cleaners. And I have to say that it's not the best. It's not a particularly fun event, I found, to be honest. The first couple of nights when you can get back to the hotel a little bit earlier. There's maybe a few bars still open in the hotels, but if you like hotel bars and big hotels with stuff in them, then that's great. But it's not really my cup of tea, I'm afraid. Yeah.
No, I think you speak for a lot there, Mark. Getting back to the setup, tell us about the compromise between obviously wanting to have a lot of top speed, obviously wanting to have as much grip as possible, and indeed the time management factor that comes into play, ride heights and everything else. And do you think anyone will end up with a car that is substantially quicker in terms of terminal velocity than anybody else this weekend?
All the teams tend to gravitate towards the same setup in the end, because there's the downside of running too much drag is quite high, just because the number of straights and I mean, there's turn 17, turn 10, turn 11. They're corners, but they're also very high speed. They're flat, unless your tyre management says that you shouldn't be, say, turn 11. But so it tends to be that I think all the cars will end up running very similar and very fast top speeds. So and that means that generating grip is a problem. There's not an awful lot you can do about that from a setup point of view, other than trying to play tricks with your brake ducts as much as possible. But realistically, you have to set those for the race because you're doing continuous running. So for qualifying, it's really down to the drivers learning how to generate the temperatures they need on their outlaps. I think, being a fairly difficult to get the tyres up to temperature, we might see multiple laps in qualifying, so a fair amount of fast, slow, fast running. and the slow laps might not be that slow. But on the other hand, though, although the tyre temperature is difficult to get into the right window, you can't get the surface temperatures too hot. There is a difference between the surface temperature requirement and the bulk tyre temperature requirement. So again, it's up to the drivers really to try to manage that the best they can. And on the outlaps, that'll mean running quite high speeds through the higher speed corners, bit of brake throttle overlap to try and generate some decent brake temperatures, a bit of gentle weaving. You don't want the tyres to be sliding dramatically across the surface, but if you can put a bit of load into the tyres by a bit of weaving, that will help as well. And they'll run DRS probably on the outlap, because that transfers more load to the front tyres, so you try and get a bit more temperature in the fronts than the rears, because the rears are easier to get temperature than the fronts, just because they're connected to your right foot, basically.
All good tools for the Oscar Piastri low surface grip toolbox.
Yes, but then we saw that he was good in Montreal. So
yeah, I know. I was being facetious, obviously.
Yeah, sure. I don't think that'll be a problem. I think the only other thing that has previously been interesting about that track is at turn 15, which is the sort of three corners at the end of the long straight. There's an inside curve at turn 15, and if you can run over that, you can gain quite a bit of lap time on the exit. Now, the reason I point that out is because obviously the McLaren used to have a bit of an advantage in being nice and soft and able to run curbs, but we've seen that they seem to have given that up a bit for this year in all the quest for downforce. So it'll be interesting just to keep an eye on who's able to take that apex curve more aggressively and gain a tenth on the exit, getting on the power a bit quicker.
Yeah. Just to clarify one point, I guess the restrictions that Pirelli within which they operate now in terms of toe in, toe out, camber is not enough to play around with tire temperatures anymore? Not
really. They're very prescriptive on the cambers in particular. So the teams will be just limited to what probably they'll just run at the maximum that they're allowed to run, because that maximum might be relatively low. I mean, typically the cars are running less camber, particularly at the front, than they would if they had a free hand. The only other difference between the cars then is the amount of camber change that the cars have. So that's the amount that the tyre cambers as the car ride height reduces. But that's something that I think teams have gravitated towards lower values over time, because if you're limited in the maximum, then if you've got lots of camber change, you end up having to run the tyres very upright in order to avoid going too negative. So that's not a good thing. So that tends to mean that the camber change at the tyres the teams run is quite low these days. And in terms of toe, to be honest, in my time, when we've tried playing with toe to generate tyre temperature, it hasn't really had a very big effect. And it is a surface tyre temperature effect more than anything else. And that's kind of the opposite of what you want in a way. Yeah. So, that can be quite negative, to be honest.
Yeah, back in the days of the tyre war, when we had more than one company in Formula One, toe was more to do just with turn-in on specific corners. Corners that you really want a good toe in, it worked quite well. But
it would depend. I mean, you could... So we on the McLaren in '98, we used to run a lot of toe in at the rear to improve entry stability.
On the rear,
whereas on the front, you're right. Running lots of toe out makes the car stable on the initial turn in, but on a bumpy circuit, it can make the car quite darty. So in Monaco, that can cause problems. I think, but the values that people run are pretty standard these days. I think most people run a mil out, 2 mil out at the front across the car to give a little bit of stability. And the rear, we've ended up running quite low levels of toe at the rear because we tended to find that adding toe in to help stability actually seemed to make the car snappier on power without giving much in the way of entry stability. It seemed to be a function of the Pirelli tyres in particular. Certainly the cars I've run for the last sort of 10 years or so, we were running close to zero toe at the rear.
Really?
Yeah.
So, Mark, your take on this weekend? I mean, it sounds like Ferrari won't be too bad there if they're quick on the straight. I mean, aren't that many
Could be.
corners to trouble them. I don't know what they'll be
Yeah.
like on that curb. Obviously, McLaren will be good. Do you think Red Bull and Merc will be right there?
I think Mercedes could be very strong. I think it
Yeah.
could suit them very well. Red Bull, I mean, obviously Max did very well in Singapore, so it's got some similarities with that, but not as many corners. The straight line speed advantage, yeah, I mean, Ferrari are strong in that area. We could see Haas doing quite well in qualifying with good, strong speed. McLaren struggled there last year, and it seemed to be a function of their good tyre degradation comes largely from keeping wheel temperatures down. And obviously, when you're struggling for tyre temperature, that can bite you. And that's actually one of the reasons why the Haas was quick in qualifying a couple of years ago in 23. We had a car that was much too aggressive on its tyres, but actually when the conditions were cold, we were actually quite quick. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think you could see McLaren maybe struggling a little bit on their outlaps. And obviously what happens then is the priority is getting a clear lap so the driver can push to get the temperatures up. If he encounters some traffic or something on his outlap or gets a queue at the end of the lap and has to wait to start his lap, that becomes a real problem. And not just for the tyre temperatures, but it starts to become a psychological problem for the driver as well, because he knows the lap that he needs to do for his outlap to get his tyres right up to temperature. And if he doesn't get that, he's kind of starting his quali lap with a little bit of a negative in his mind. So that can be a problem.
Yeah. Mark, I don't know if you've seen the news from Pirelli about their allocation of laps for Qatar.
Yeah.
That, I mean, on the face of it, am I correct in saying that if you've got a car with good tyre management, the McLaren, that's a bit of a pain because you're not going to be able to show that as much against a Ferrari, Mercedes?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Red Bull, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've lived with that limitation before, I guess, in 2023, right?
Yes, in 23 we had the same. And it just makes for a dull race from a strategical point of view, because anyone who, as you say, has an advantage in that area can't use it. So it just makes it easier for the cars that are less good and the drivers that are less good in that area. So I think it's a bit of a shame, but I suspect, the issues in 23 were very real. The tyres were becoming substantially damaged.
By the curbs, right?
On the curbs mostly, but I think there's a bit of a wear issue as well. But I suspect as the cars have got faster and faster, more downforce, the loads are going up and up. And even though in 23 they actually narrowed the track by painting the white line inside the curbs so that the drivers couldn't use the curbs so much, but there is still a lot of very high speed cornering there. And some curb usage, and they're obviously very worried that that's going to cause problems. So I guess that's why they've said they're going to do that. Yeah,
it's a shame.
It is a shame.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, if McLaren don't have a great weekend in Vegas and all of a sudden it's getting tight, then that's the last thing they would need. But at least they know going in, I guess, which is one thing.
Yeah.
Why is that not happened on any other circuit? It's not the only circuit with curbs and lots of quick corners, is it? Why is Qatar so difficult like that?
It does stand out in terms of the combination of curbs and speed. There's an awful lot of high speed with the serrated curbs on the outside, and the cars were running on those curves for long durations, which you don't see at other tracks. So it is actually quite a unique track in that sense, and that's what was causing the damage.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for all that input, Mark. I just to close with, and just going back to Brazil, I think you've done a little bit more research on the restart there and what Kimi was doing at the restart, correct?
Yeah, I had a little look because it was annoying me, just not being quite sure what was going on. And what seemed to be the case was that as he was coming up the hill, so there's that kink just before the start-finish straight.
Yeah.
And it looked like Lando had lifted off and then gone on full throttle. And at that precise point, Kimi Antonelli was actually on the brakes, probably just trying to warm his brakes up for the last time. So he got completely caught out. Then he goes, and Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc are already going as well. In fact, they were going even before they kind of preempted Lando's going. So they were on a proper charge. And I think Kimi must have thought, okay, I'm going to be swamped here. and he actually looked like he lifted a little coming up towards the line. His car speed didn't drop, but he didn't accelerate as quickly as he could have done. And I think he probably did that to try and disturb the two guys behind him who he knew were already on his case. But the reality is that because you can't pass before the control line, obviously, and that's why it would have disturbed them. But they kept at it. They didn't flinch. And I think that just compounded the issue of all the cars arriving at the start of braking for turn one together.
And compounded also by being in third gear rather than second.
Yes. And the revs that he was at were actually high enough to be out of the sort of standing start region that can cause issues with drivability. So I don't know why he was in third gear at that point. To me, it just seems like it's a mistake. But the fact is, he actually accelerated quite. He didn't go for it straight away. It looks like he accelerated a bit more progressively. So I guess I wonder if in his mind he was thinking, well, Lando's already gone. All I need to do now is preserve my position, and so by not accelerating as hard, trying to disturb the guys behind him, and so they don't pass him before the line.
And my take on just going back down the hill again, back from where it all started. My take was that he actually tried to anticipate what Lando was going to do, and there's a moment when he does give it throttle. And it's like, I think this is when Lando's going to do it, and I'm going to be a star here. And it's like, oh no, he's not, and I got to hit the brakes. And that's that's a big mistake to make, because the last thing you want to be is on the brakes when the leader's accelerating. I think that was also, as you've pointed out, I mean, that was the big issue, because you don't want to be doing that. Brakes okay for temperature, but not just because you've misjudged it. And then you're in trouble. Anyway,
he just completely mistimed it, I think. And then was trying to deal with the consequences, and that led to the incident, really. So there you go.
Well, thanks for that, Mark, and we'll come back to you if we may. Some of your insight over the Vegas weekend, time difference as it is, weird that it is, but look forward to that. Well, what's that for us? It's not going to be too bad, is it?
I think first practice starts at midnight in the UK, so that's
I'm thinking we'll do stuff in the mornings. You can watch first practice. We'll get up early the next day.
I'd just be interested to see who uses hard tyres in P1, because if they do, then they're not saving 2 sets. But,
that's going to be fascinating, isn't it? We'll talk about that. Look forward to that. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks, Peter. Cheers.
Fascinating chat there with Mark Slade, and right at the end there, just talking about what Kimi was doing at the restart there. I mean, imagine the doors that opens now that he's basically shown that you can get away with that the leader of the race can floor it, and if you've not made a great start, responded to that in the way you should, you're in the wrong gear, whatever you are, right up until the overtaking line, you can back off and try and keep everybody behind you. And imagine the precedent that now sets if, let's say, 2 Ferraris are running 1-2, and the job of the second Ferrari is to keep everybody away from the leader. You can now do that, basically, on what Kimi was doing in Interlagos. That's why we keep going on about that, because there was so much wrong about that restart now when we look back at it. And it's very easy in Formula One, I think, to say, oh, well, that was last race. Let's forget about that. Let's focus on Vegas, move on. But we shouldn't, because every time you look at telemetry, more comes to the surface of actually what led up to that first corner shunt. And the more we look at it, the more unjustly Oscar Piastri was treated, in my opinion. That's one. 2, interesting, the situation going into Qatar and confirming the suspicion that now if you are in a McLaren, which because of its aero efficiency, by definition, is a better car for tyre management in general compared with Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, now their ability to show that, to benefit from that increased aero efficiency, is limited by the number of laps they can do on each set of tyres. So that's another interesting point. And then finally, looking back at the lap of Vegas, let's see what happens on that curb at turn 15. I put a picture in there of what may be the 14, 15 section, but it may also be 6, 7, and 8. I'm not exactly sure. So if that was 6, 7, 8, my apologies. But it's kind of the same. They're going to a left, then a right, then a left. And you can see there one of the cars I pictured up on the curb, but it's the next curb that's the critical one, according to Mark. So that'll be interesting to see. And also interesting to get his comments about toe in and toe out. And it's kind of a shame, isn't it, in this era of Pirelli monopoly, of wanting to control all the things that might potentially go wrong. The teams have had that taken away from them. The toe in, toe out camber, Ackerman, all those things that used to be part of setup have now kind of gone away. And it's all about, minute adjustments to tire pressures or whatever. Anyway, that was just, there we go. Just trying to get temperatures in the tires for that lap of Vegas, which, as Mark points out quite correctly, which we all knew anyway, sadly, but we had to have a race engineer to confirm it. It is just lots and lots of flat out stuff. And interesting to hear that he thinks Ferrari will go well, quick in a straight line, also has Ferrari. Didn't mention Sauber there, but I guess they'll go quite well too with the Ferrari power. Not that they've got a lot of power, but they just seem to be pretty good at the top end there, whatever, in terms of top speed. And it'll be interesting to see how the battle then is raged between, if Ferrari are joining it, and we got Red Bull kind of in there, same compounds as Singapore, actually, interestingly enough. And although Mark said, Max went well there, of course he was blown away effectively by Lando. So, it was 6 and 1, half a dozen the other, whether that was a great race for them or not. I think Red Bull could have been nearer had they not started Max on the wrong tyre. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it. Anyway, with no more ado, let's get into the questions and comments now. The first is a super chat, actually. Thank you very much indeed. This is from A Racer 666. Thank you very much for that. What kind of training would drivers like Oscar, Lando, George, in order to get closer in skills to short corner drivers like Max and Charles? What sort of training would they do? Well, what they could do is lots of work in a road car on a coned off circuit with lots of runoff area, and just start to sit next to somebody like Rob, probably not the only guy in the world, Rob Wilson, but others, just to see at the moment how they create a corner, what their initial turn-in is like, what their braking input and output is like, and then start to refine those in a road car. And we've seen the tangible results of that with drivers like Kimi Räikkönen, very good example. And we know that young drivers today, in general, once they get to about Formula 2, don't believe they've got anything more to learn other than all the stuff that comes from experience, which they can do on the sim, which they can do in the gym, which they can do on the racetrack, talking to other drivers, looking at track-craft stuff. But in terms of their technique of how to use the steering, the brakes, and the throttle, they kind of reach their peak of what they think is necessary and what they can do when they're in Formula 2. I know that from experience, from drivers like Bruno Senna, a very good example. Very quick, actually. But once he'd sort of had 1 or 2 good races, he felt, yeah, got this now. And they failed to progress and learn. And you see, that's why so many drivers come into Formula 1 now, not driving like Max or Charles, or Isaac Hadjar, got to say, or a little bit of Oscar a year ago, Lewis, as he was prior to 21, 22. They're coming in with their own basic way of driving. And generally speaking, it's a sort of Franco Colapinto thing of brake as late as possible, get the power on as soon as possible. Yeah, be smooth, but when you're right on the limit with 3 seconds to go at the end of Q1, smoothness isn't that important. It's just getting there, and of course the sweet spot disappears, and they're right on edge. And the slightest error of judgment, which inevitably they're going to make because they're human, will result in a loss of time. Whereas a far more compact style, like that of Isaac Hadjar, to take the latest example, will allow him a lot more freedom, even when he's on the limit of what he can do. Yeah, of course he'll make mistakes, just as Max Verstappen makes mistakes. But I don't think any of these drivers that you mentioned, Oscar, Lando, George, actually feel that they need to change anything about their driving, because all of them have won Grand Prix. And the minute you've won a Grand Prix, your methodology and your mindset is, well, I've won a Grand Prix. Nobody's better than me. I just need a race-winning, Grand Prix-winning, championship-winning car, and I'll win every race. That's basically, they don't say that, but that's basically the way they get up in the morning. If they didn't think that, they probably wouldn't be racing drivers. So they don't think, oh, what's Max doing? And he only finished 4th anyway. I beat Max yesterday. Why should I learn from him? It's kind of, they think that. And so they don't see the need. And it's a great shame. It's a great shame. And as I keep drawing that analogy, and it's one that I obviously is a hypothetical one, but if a young tennis player who had won a couple of tournaments was walking past the warm-up area, and there was, I don't know, Alcaraz having a knock before his match, he wouldn't just stop and look for 3 seconds. He would stop and look for 10 minutes and watch Alcaraz and see what he's doing, even though this young guy I'm describing has already won a couple of tournaments. That's the way it is in other sports. You look at his top spin. How does he do that? Oh, the footwork. But they don't do that in Formula One. And I was thinking today, I was out walking Dexter before we did the live stream. I was thinking today, a guy like Colton Herta has got an unbelievable opportunity, assuming it all comes off, to race in Formula One, to be an American in Formula One, and to do well. I mean, he's got massive natural talent. You can see it in the IndyCar images. But for sure, he's got something to learn. And I have no idea at this stage whether he has a sort of Hadjar Max feel for creating a short corner and that suppleness, or whether he's a Liam Lawson, massively good reflexy, car control-y driver that's right on the edge with very wide entries and super late braking. I've no idea where he falls in. I imagine it's somewhere between the two. But if you were Colton Herta now, you'd be wanting to get to every Grand Prix, and you would be going there anonymously, I think, and going into the grandstands or the spectator areas, buying your tickets and watching from places where you can see the difference between a Max and a George and a Lewis and an Oscar, and trying to get to understand what they're doing. And then because you're Colton Herta, you probably get to talk to them anyway and ask them why they're doing what they're doing. But it'd be interesting to know if he's doing that. And that's what I would do, and that's what I'd recommend if I was managing Colton Herta, that you get out there and you watch what is going on. He'll probably be in Vegas, but that's a waste of time because there are no real corners there where you can watch anything. You can't really see suppleness, and everything else is, it's all straights and hard braking and, well, high speed braking. And, he'll be inundated with interviews or whatever, with the Haas thing. But I'm only talking about him because he's a young American with a great opportunity on his ahead of him. And Vegas, forget about it, but he should be in Qatar and he should be in Abu Dhabi watching without people knowing that he's even there, I think. So he can spend as much time as possible watching. That would be my advice on what to do there. Thanks for that question very much. And you finished by saying thanks very much. Enjoyed your channel and insights. Very kind of you to say that. Thank you. George Menares Harris. Hello, Mr. Windsor from Chile. Hola. Always thankful for your lessons. Lessons. Hope they're not lessons. Sound like a teacher now on Formula One. Eliseo just turned 70. Tell us about his style. Cheers. Yeah, Eliseo Salazar. Buen cumpleaños. Yeah, great guy. Good friend of mine. Spent a lot of time with Eliseo when he was racing in Formula One for ATS. Not slow either. Pretty good. He was a sort of, let me think. At the time, I sort of saw him as a sort of Jonathan Palmer. He was pretty supple, pretty good. Nothing outlandish in terms of getting into the corner early and even going in that direction. But nonetheless, he had the feel to be a pretty good braker and a pretty good initial steering input guy. Got a lot of polish, in other words, and a lot better than people took him for. Famous, of course, for that incident with Nelson Piquet, when they collided, and it was probably Eliseo's fault, I don't know, Hockenheim, and Nelson gets out of the car and starts thumping Eliseo. And as Eliseo said, as long as I'm wearing a helmet, I feel pretty comfortable about that. So I think he was right about that. So yeah, congrats to him. Good driver. And Chile, amazing that he was in Formula One, and he was good, and he did well in IndyCar too, and all credit to him. Sarosh Soman, another regular. Hey there, buddy. Peter, what's your comparison between the following three drivers: Carlos Reutemann, Nigel Mansell, Max Verstappen. The more I learn about Nigel, I keep getting the feeling that he would qualify to be the unluckiest driver of all time. Well, yeah, I mean, Nigel, it depends what you mean by luck, first of all, because he was certainly unlucky right up until back end of 85, because as we now know, he is one of the great Formula One drivers of any era. I mean, he's super quick, and he proved that his versatility when he went to America in 93. He's that good. But he never had a chance to show that until back end of 85. And bearing in mind, he made his Formula One debut in Austria 1980. That's a lot of time for a great Grand Prix driver to be in an uncompetitive car with most people not only not rating him, but guys like Bernie Ecclestone saying he should be disqualified for 6 months and find this, and Peter War saying, you know, it's unlikely he'll keep the Lotus drive, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people did not rate Nigel for 5 years, and that's very unusual for somebody of that quality. So that was the unlucky part of Nigel's career, in my opinion, that he didn't have the lucky breaks that everybody else who went on to be great Grand Prix drivers had very early in their career, whether you're talking about Alan Prost, Niki Lauda, Fangio, anybody who's gone on to win a lot of Grand Prix has usually been noticed, certainly by their first year in Formula One, and thereafter they haven't necessarily always been in the best car, but they've been in a pretty good team and there or thereabouts, whereas Nigel was never in that situation. So that was one, and it's part of his resilience and self-belief that he managed to get through that. And eventually when Williams came on song and had a good car, everybody then sort of said, oh, well, of course he was going to win in 92. He had the best car. Well, you know, he spent a lot of years not having the best car, so give him his due, let him have it. 86, obviously very unlucky to have that tyre failure in the final race. But was it unlucky? You know, that was just, as I say, you know, the other things happened that year that accounted for Nigel not having clinched the championship by Adelaide. So you can't just put it down to one race. And I think, in a way, Nigel is very lucky. A, he had a great car finally. B, he was able to go to America and do what he did there. And C, he's still with us, and he lived, you know, raced in an incredibly dangerous era and had a lot of shunts, so most of which were due to mechanical failure. So he did very, very well in that sense. Carlos Reutemann, very similar to Nigel in the way he drove. Both of them short corner drivers, very, very soft with their inputs, very, very good in terms of suppleness and feel for the car, tyre management as it would be described today, as it was important even back then. Very good on tyres, very good on brakes, very good on gearboxes, all those things that come with having a great touch and feel. So yeah, Nigel and Carlos, very similar. And Carlos, I was watching with Carlos at the 79 British Grand Prix from the Woodcote chicane. I took Colin Chapman down there with us, and just to show Nigel coming through in the Unipart march, and Carlos said, yeah, he's got it. He's definitely got it. That was his first comment on watching Nigel for a couple of laps through Woodcote. And then finally Max, you know, it's the same genre. They're all three of them brilliant short corner drivers, different in personality, different in character, different in the way their careers have run and evolved, and the backgrounds to those careers and the opportunities. I mean, Nigel never had the opportunities that Max had early in his Formula One career. Carlos, slightly different. He had good backing from the Automobile Club of Argentina, YPF, the national fuel company, branded on his cars in Formula 2. And he had a reasonable budget to take into Formula 1 in around 71. He did that. He did the race at Brands in the Brabham. And then he did, what was it, the McLaren? Can't remember. One of the two. Anyway, he did 72. He tried to get a Tyrrell drive on the basis that Tyrrell had run 3 cars by then for Peter Revson and Chris Amon. One-off races, admittedly, but nonetheless, Carlos wanted desperately to be in a third Tyrrell, but he couldn't persuade Ken to do that. So he went to Brabham, and it was a bit of a mess because, you know, it was Bernie's first year, and there was Graham Hill, who in theory was the number 1 driver, but he was on a decline by then, and Wilson Fittipaldi, good guy, quick driver too, not in the same class as Carlos, but a lot going on, you know, with Bernie taking it over, 3 cars, you see what I mean. But, you know, Gordon Murray was there, and he did produce that beautiful BT 42 for 1973. So that was when Carlos's career really started to take off. Although, got to remember, he put a Brabham BT34 on the pole for his first ever race, which was Argentina 72, and it was a genuine pole. It was nothing to do with Argentine timekeepers. So anyway, interesting. They're all three very similar drivers in terms of the way they drive the car, the way they get into corners early, and their inputs, their rate of inputs, which is the critical thing. All brilliant on all three of those. Great question. Thank you very much. Another one from Sarosh. Rewatch your interview with David Brown. It was super fun. Nigel said he already has TC and that's in his feet. Just amazed at the level of finesse that Grand Prix drivers are having. Yeah, David Brown was a perfect compliment to Nigel because he had a very straightforward approach, a bit like Mark Slade, actually, I think. A very straightforward, get away from all the crud approach to motor racing, to driving, to Formula One, and understood Nigel pretty well. He knew, I think David was on Nigel's car from about back in 85, 86 probably, and he knew that Nigel was super quick and was the captain of the ship, and if you wanted Nigel to think about an alternative, you had to do it in the right way, diplomatic way. So he's a very good counterpoint to Patrick Head, actually, and he had a very good relationship with Nigel. I'm not sure either of them realized that at the time, but I think looking back, Nigel probably realizes how good David Brown was, and David for sure knows how well they gelled and how the results they got together spoke for themselves. And when all the PK stuff started, David Brown was a really good guy for Nigel to sort of go and huddle within the corner and do his thing. Very, very good. Ashat Chowdhury, 5062. Mr. Windsor, does long corner drivers like Lando have any advantage over short corner drivers on certain tracks? Well, again, it's not just about line. It's not, here, because he's braking in a straight line for longer, he's missing that bump that Max has to go over because he wants to turn in earlier. It's not that at all. Because, as I've said a couple of times now, Max could drive the exact lines that Lando Norris drives, and he would still be quicker than Lando, because it's to do with the suppleness and the feeling of the surface of the road and the way he can hit that, and the harmony of his inputs with all the dynamic weight going around the car. So immediately Max would find an area where his rotation point is just perfect, whereas Lando would tend to be a little bit more locked into what he's doing based on the trajectory that he thinks he's got to have going into that corner. It's that. And so obviously the line is important if it's to do with avoiding bumps, if it's to do with a change of direction happening at exactly the right moment and not doing it too soon in order to have too many revs going through the engine. But it's never an advantage, all things being equal, to be driving long corners rather than short corners. Otherwise, Max would be driving longer corners. He'd be putting left rears up on the curb on the outside just before turn-in and catching it, as Liam Lawson does sometimes, or Carlos Sainz has done a few times, or even Nico Rosberg has done. Max doesn't put himself in that position, not because he wants to avoid the chance of that happening, but because naturally he wants to get in early anyway. So there's one thing that's immediately gone from all the things that could go wrong. And in order to answer your question, look at the way Max Verstappen drives. He could drive the Lando lap, and he could probably be a little bit quicker than Lando. But he doesn't choose to do that because there's a quicker way of doing it. So on any circuit, there will always be a place where Max can, let's say at Vegas, which is possible. There's not really a corner at Vegas probably where you're going to see Max going in earlier than many others. It looks to me the sort of circuit where even under high-speed braking, going into something quite tight, because there's the track's curving a little bit or whatever, they're all going to be doing more or less the same thing. The difference between a Max and a Lando around that lap of Vegas will be very subtle. It'll probably be most obvious in a change of direction situation where Max is coming out of a left-hander and getting ready for the right, and Lando he'll do it very well. He'll do a lovely exit, and then he'll do a beautiful transition like that. Whereas Max will find a little point right in the middle where the car's actually not going left or right, and that's when he'll put in the steering load to go right. And well, that's something to do with short corners, but that is what creates short corners. That's what creates the feeling for short corners. It's that feeling for knowing when to put in the load. And yeah, and Vegas will be hard to see that. I'm convinced of that. But nonetheless, there will be points where Max can still do something a little bit different. Not many, but there will be some points. And of course, the braking, the high-speed braking, the warning of the car, just to make sure that everything is settled before he's really braking hard, rather than just jabbing the brakes and hoping the back end doesn't jump out and that's not too unstable. That's one of the ways Max creates a car that is more stable than other drivers. They may, in the same car, they may say, oh, it's quite an unstable rear. But Max, it's not that he's got the reflexes to control the unstable rear. It's just that the way his inputs are controlling or doing more to control the instability of the rear. They're slightly softer and then harder. And the car's more settled. The tires are more settled on the road. That's what's going on. So, yeah, interesting. Go on this for hours, really, but we need to move on, obviously, and try and get through as many as we can as ever. Probably won't again, but I'll do my best. 01 Drew C, how you doing, Peter? Very well, thanks. If Merck say they have the best engine and fuel for next year, Alpine say they gave up their 25 season to be on fire next year, and Aston have Adrian, so that the smart bet is 1, 2, 3 World Constructors Champion. Well, yeah, I mean, don't believe anything that anybody's saying. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, Aston have Andy Cowell. I think that's a bit more significant than Adrian. Andy Cowell, who is probably the best manager of power unit programs in the history of power unit programs, PUs, in Formula One. And he's there with Adrian, and Adrian's got all his experience of how he managed Honda. So that's an incredibly powerful package, excuse the pun. Alpine say they're going to be on next year, are going to be on fire. Unlikely, I would think, but anyway, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, Alpine, aren't Alpine going to be with, I don't know, Mercedes next year, isn't that right? I think. I don't know, kind of stopped thinking about Alpine a long time ago. I think they are. Merck have the best engine and fuel. Well, that's an interesting one. Of course, they're not going to say, we got a great engine, but the fuel's pretty rubbishy, because they get a lot of money from Petronas, don't they? So they're going to say that. But do you really think Petronas are going to be doing a better job than all the other oil companies out there? Very unlikely, I think. I think they'll all probably come up with more or less the same solutions. And because they've been working on it for over a year now. And the power unit is, 50% electric anyway. So all the stuff about the previous knowledge is kind of less important than it's ever been. So I still say I wouldn't place many bets yet. I mean, obviously, Mercedes are probably going to do a better job than, I don't know, Sauber. But at the end of the day, nobody knows yet what it's going to be like in 26. And roll on the new cars, and we'll be getting Scarbs and Mark Slade to talk about those as they're launched. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see how much we can actually tell at these launches. I presume they're all going to be virtual launches over the winter, and there's probably very little we'll be able to tell from any of them, I would imagine. And the only thing that really give us information will be lap times, testing. Even then, well, yeah, but he's running fuel or whatever, So maybe even the first race, we have to wait for that. Anyway, we'll see. Aaron, hi Peter, do you think Nico Rosberg would have reached the level he did at Mercedes if Lewis wasn't there? Do you think Nico started as a number 2 level driver? We're talking about Nico Rosberg now. He was pretty good at Williams. He was obviously very quick in everything he did prior to even Williams. Formula 2, Formula 3, he wasn't that far away from Lewis. He was always kind of in the frame. And when he got to Williams, he was obviously very quick. But the most interesting thing about Nico, even in the Williams years, was that he still was very hungry to learn and to improve. Very good brain like that. And that's unusual. But he did make mistakes. And as I said, I mentioned him earlier. I remember watching him in a test in Barcelona, and he did exactly what I just described, caught an edge because his turn-in was so wide, and he was leaning on the car so much on exit as well. and the slightly damp curbs. And I think he learned quite a lot from Lewis. I think it's a good point you make. I think he had the brain to learn from Lewis. I don't think Lewis probably learnt very much from Nico whilst Nico was there. But once Nico had gone and beaten him in the championship, I think Lewis then realised that he needed to up his game behind the scenes more than anything, and really started to need to get on top of a lot of the electronic gizmos that he was perhaps only half using, and do a little bit more sim work to understand it all, and focus more on quick laps, individual qualifying laps. And he did all that very well. He actually improved a lot after Nico had retired. But I think Nico did learn a lot from Lewis. And your question is, would he have reached a level if Lewis wasn't there? And it's a good point, as I say. I mean, obviously the Mercedes was a good car, but if it hadn't been Lewis in that car, and he hadn't known Lewis the way he had from Formula 3 onwards, would Nico have responded in the way he did to Lewis and improved at the rate he did? Hypothetical question, isn't it? I hate to be boring, but I suspect the answer is no. I think Nico knew how much he could benefit from watching Lewis, learning from Lewis, and trying to be as near to Lewis as he could in a couple of areas. And he certainly did become a shorter corner driver, and he certainly did become more supple with his inputs, and he was better under braking. And all these things that were a bit rough and ready when he was at Williams disappeared when he was at Merck. And yeah, I think it's a good point. If Lewis hadn't been there, I'm not sure Nico would have reached that level. Jez James 2415. Hi Peter, I once saw a doc where Claire Williams asked Frank how much he thought a newspaper is, and he said 10 pence. I think she wanted to show how her dad had a little concept of life outside Formula One. Yeah, it's probably true. I mean, I think Frank was the template for all of us at the time. If you call yourself any sort of Formula One aficionado, whether you be a would-be team owner, a mechanic, a sponsorship purveyor, or a journalist, you should eat, sleep, drink Formula One 24/7. Holidays are for those that wimp out and don't like Formula One. And Frank was always like that, and he was also slightly, I don't know what the word is. I mean, dyslexic certainly is the wrong word, but I can tell you from first-hand knowledge that Frank could remember the engine numbers of virtually every Cosworth engine that he'd ever fitted to any of his Formula One cars. It was a little number at the back, just over the clutch housing, and it was the bell housing, and it was, there was a 131, which is a great Judd engine, or a 247, a great Cosworth engine, but you didn't want 246 for the race. You'd only use that for testing or whatever. And he knew all these numbers just like that. And he knew, and if he flew to London to LA, and then back to London again, and I'd meet him and we'd go to the office, he would know the registration of both aircraft on which he'd flown, the exact type number of the aircraft as well, and whether or not it took off 1 or 2 minutes on time or delayed, and the exact height at which it was flying. All these little details were just there, and he just absorbed them. However, he had no concept of, in the days when VCRs, video cassette recorders, were a big thing, he had no concept of how to set the timing to record on one of those. Couldn't even begin to think about it. So there were black spots, whatever, in the way Frank's brain worked. And although he was very, very good, he was languages. He could pick up a language in 2 weeks. I mean, when he was out in 77, treading the boards in Riyadh, trying to get the Middle East to put money into Formula One, paving the way for everything we have in Formula One today, actually, doesn't get much credit for that. Frank went out there believing, like most of us, I guess, at one point, that they live the same week as we do, and that everybody works Monday to Friday and Saturday, Sunday is the weekend. Well, of course they don't. And he spent a lot of Fridays sitting around doing nothing, not being able to have meetings. And he learnt Arabic pretty well in that time, pretty quickly. And this is obviously long before his accident, and he was still out running half marathons and indeed marathons as well. Very, very fit guy. So he was multilingual, but there were other things that he just couldn't even begin to think about. So he was a strange person like that. When he was in hospital after his road accident, I was beside his bed. Ginny and I basically took it in turns to be next to his bed for about 2 months, so that when he woke up, there was a friendly face there. And at one point, he was semi-conscious, and he started talking to me about the Battle of Coral Sea and and the exact number of destroyers, heavy cruisers, aircraft carriers on the Japanese fleet, not the American fleet, the Japanese fleet. And he knew it all perfectly. Amazing. And yet, you know, if he had to make a decision about whether to hire Nigel Mansell, it went on for like 18 months before he could make his mind up. And when I took Mark Webber to him after Mark won the Formula Ford Festival, it's, oh, well, you know, maybe, is he any good? And there were some things that he was just completely incapable of deciding and understanding. So it doesn't surprise me that Claire said that. And yeah, you know, he never really, he had a wonderful family. I mean, Jonathan, Claire, Ginny, obviously, who we very much miss. But unlike most, I mean, Frank's perception of being a racer was always Formula One dominates. And if he had to go to Christmas parties, for example, in London, and he lived in Oxfordshire or wherever, Berkshire. But if he had to drive to, say, Jackie Oliver's London townhouse to a Christmas party, which he felt, you know, obliged to go to, he would always make a point. If the invitation was for 8 o'clock, he'd get there for 8:45, not because he was fashionably late, but because he wanted to be in a position where nobody could hem in his car in case he wanted to leave early. He wanted to be in pole position for how to get out of there, so the last person to park, in other words. That was just Frank. Everything was a race. Everything was a race for Frank, and nothing else mattered. And there was that famous moment, well, I call it famous in my own life, when not long after Frank's accident, it was one of the first weeks in which he was back at work, and Ian Cunningham who was a guy that I met. He used to write me letters when I was riding at Autocar, and I got to know him, and he always wanted to work in Formula One. So when Frank needed a sort of right-hand man, I recommended Ian Cunningham, and he was there driving the car, I think, and Frank was in the front. Obviously now he had all these injuries, and I was sitting in the back to try to do some work with Frank before we got to the office, and, you know, dictate letters and stuff, and talk about things. And I was with this guy from Paris Match magazine, who was a French journalist, who was one of the first journalists to interview Frank. And he sort of was sitting in the back next to me, and we were going to do the interview at Frank's office. And he said to Frank, Frank, has this accident changed your philosophy of life at all, in terms of how you live your life and what you feel about Formula One and your private life? And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. And Frank did not disappoint. He said, there were moments after the accident when I felt that I should have perhaps spent a bit more time with the family, and I maybe smelt the flowers more and spent more time just enjoying life. But I'm back to normal now. That sums up Frank Williams. And bless him, you know, what a racer. Absolute normal racer. Just what a guy. And I learned so much from Frank. Very, very cool. So, and there's Jez James goes on. Another thing in the documentary, they asked Frank if he would ever give up Formula One. He said, why? They said, the doctor's orders. He said, I'm fine. I can't walk, but I'm fine. He was so incredibly switched to Formula One. Well, yeah, that's right. And, there was that moment when it was Ginny's turn to be by the bed, and she rang me very distressed early one morning to say that they'd moved Frank from the intensive care unit back into the surgery area because he'd taken a massive decline. We're talking about 2 weeks after he arrived back in the London hospital from France. And they'd said to Ginny, at this point we normally ask the next of kin whether we want the life support machine switched off. and this is when Ginny rang me. She said, I just can't believe we got to that point. I thought things were going well, and now they're talking about switching off the life support machine, and he's not going to make it. And I just rang Bernie, and Bernie said, yeah, Frank wouldn't want to live like this, and probably the best thing to do. And I said, well, I drove straight in. It took me about an hour and a half to get in. And I remember, getting there, and Ginny was obviously absolutely beside herself, and it was just her and I, and I said, to me, if Frank survives this crisis now, we know he doesn't have any brain injuries, and we know that he's completely lucid, as shown by the Battle of the Coral Sea. And if he's got his faculties there, he can run a Formula One team. He needs a telephone, he needs obviously some mobility, but there's nothing to stop him still running the Formula One team. So the last thing you should even think about is switching off the life support machine and keep going. And Ginny said, yeah, totally agree. And so that she said, no, do not do it. And they brought her through. Sid Watkins, James Weaver's father was involved in that. Very, very good surgeon as well. James Weaver, great racing driver, great car control, and so he made it. I remember talking to Ginny a couple of times after that, talking a couple of years later now, and she said she'd mentioned that incident to Frank, and Frank said, oh, that's a load of rubbish, that never happened. So Frank didn't want to know about that incident. So I'm surprised that that it's like that in the documentary, because if it is, that's not actually factual, because Frank, I believe to the day he died, did not believe he was that close to dying at that point, and he never wanted to know that Ginny had done that and that conversation had taken place. WCR Movies. Hi Peter, how are you? I hope you're well. I am very well, thank you very much. Are some of your favourite last round title deciders from earlier in history of Formula One, and why? Thanks for your time. Well, to be favourite title deciders, they have to be the guy you wanted to winning, don't they? So let me think about it. 56. I actually wanted Peter Collins to win. Not that I was around, not that I even knew that Formula One existed. I was only, 3 years old or 5 years old or 4 years old. But I think Peter Collins deserved to win the championship in 56. And I wish he had, in a way, because I think he was that good. But he did give the championship to his teammate at Ferrari, Fangio. So that was that. There was a big title decision at South Africa 62. Jim Clark versus Graham Hill. Jimmy led almost from start to finish, but had an oil leak towards the end, giving the title to Graham, which I found very annoying. But not that Graham didn't deserve it, he did, and BRM too, of course, deserved it. 61, just to go back 1 year, obviously there was that title decider at Monza, Von Trips and Phil Hill, and sadly that ended with the tragic loss of Von Trips, giving the title to Phil. I always felt sorry for Phil that he won it under those conditions, and even worse, it was the penultimate round of the championship. The last round was the US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, the first ever Grand Prix to be held at Watkins Glen. And Ferrari, because A, they won the championship, and B, because of the accident at Monza, decided not to send any cars. So there was the new world champion, the American Phil Hill, in America at the first Grand Prix ever to be held at Watkins Glen, with no car to race. So he took pictures and did a journalistic job. I thought that was pretty bad. 64, yeah, Mexico 64 was terrible because Jimmy again led almost from start to finish and had another oil leak. And the championship then went to John Surtees because Lorenzo Bandini, Surtees' teammate, took out Graham Hill, who should then have won it with Jimmy's retirement. So John Surtees won it. But again, I don't hold that against John because he was such a great driver and such a great all-rounder, and he deserved it. So in a way, I'm very pleased he won it. I don't know. Then it goes on, doesn't it? 68 was another big one. That was Graham Hill. Yeah, couldn't have been a better winner really in 68. I think Denny Hulme and Jackie Stewart were the other two that year in Mexico, and Denny won it. And Graham won it. And that was the year we lost Jimmy, and Graham won it in that Gold Leaf Lotus that probably Jimmy would have been driving, and Jimmy would have won that championship, but Graham won it. 70, Jochen Rindt, Jackie Ickx. That was the right winner, but it was so sad that we lost Jochen, and he was the only to date posthumous world champion we've had, luckily. And that was a very unhappy time all round, and no way anybody could feel good about the championship. 74, Clay and Emerson. Yeah, Emerson. I was a bit sort of between the two there. I was a big Clay fan, and I love Clay and everything he did in Formula One. I think he's a very underrated driver, actually, in what he achieved. But he never won the championship. 76, I was for a long time I was a Niki Lauda fan. So yeah, I got to have a lot of respect for James and got to know him very well. But Niki, in a way, I think, was the deserving winner in 76. But he did pull out of that last race, didn't he, in Japan? And so, James won it. And so it goes on endlessly. But I'm trying to think of a result. I mean, the worst one of all, obviously, from my personal perspective, was Abu Dhabi 21. I think it was absolutely appalling. Lewis did everything he could have done, should have done that day, and it was taken away from him by a ridiculously poor, wrong decision by Michael Massey, the race director. And he just changed the rules right at the end of the race, basically, and it gave the win to Max. And you know how much of a Max fan I am, but I don't think that Abu Dhabi race will ever be anything other than a complete rip-off, and it should have been Lewis's championship in 2021. So do I have any favourites through all of this? I don't think I do. They're all pretty miserable, really. I don't like these. I've always said, I love Grand Prix where the guy on the pole leads from start to finish. French Grand Prix 65, whatever. And I love World Championships, which are over 5 races before the end, and we can all go focus on something else. But that's not the way of the world in 2025, is it? Has to be a clincher, has to be down to the line, has to be this, has to be that. Millions of overtakes. Well. So it goes on. Completely lawless. What do you think happened with Oscar? Lost mental confidence, car changed out from under him, tracks that didn't favour him, or luck? It's almost like Lando stole Oscar's mojo. Can he get it back? Well, we've talked about that quite a lot. I've talked about it quite a lot with Mark Slade, and both of us think that, well, obviously, there's a mojo thing going on, and it kind of began in Baku with that ridiculous start he made, and then the shunt, which Mark Webber, his manager, said, well, everybody has an off day. He's only human. He'll be back. But he hasn't really been back ever since. Okay, Singapore, he was quick-ish. But I think he was completely psyched out by what happened going into the first corner in Singapore. Until that point, he looked as if he was shrugging off Baku, and he was the same Oscar Piastri. But when he had to make room for Lando to avoid Lando hitting him, and he almost hit the wall on the outside coming out of turn 3, then I think he got on the radio and he wanted action taken within the team. He wanted that Lando to give that position back to him. Nothing to do with what the stewards thought. This is my interpretation. And the team didn't do that. And I think ever since then, he's felt that the momentum is swaying towards Lando. But the interesting point is that he let himself then suffer because of that, and his whole level has dropped because of the way he thinks. You would imagine back in, I don't know, April, May, if you'd said, if Oscar suddenly became aware that everybody in the team wanted Lando to win the championship this year, how do you think Oscar would have reacted? You would have thought, well, he's a tough Aussie. He's not going to let that get to him. So long as he's got the same car as Lando, he's going to race him all the way to the finish. That's the way I would have imagined Oscar would have reacted to that bit of news. But when the news hit him basically in Singapore, he didn't react that way. He went down to the point where his race engineer towards the end of the race was saying, if there's a safety car now, what sort of tyres would you want to have if we brought you in? And he just said, well, I don't know, the way it's going, I don't really care. Do whatever you like, sort of thing, which was not the Oscar you imagined you would see or hear from back in April. And it's kind of been there ever since, as I say. Now, I've got a further thing that I add to this, which is that, in my opinion, Oscar has changed the way he drives quite radically. and he's changed the way he drives according to all the information he's constantly subjected to about the way Lando's doing the lap. And he's become confused as the quickest way to drive the lap, whether Lando's telemetry is the way to go, if Lando's going quicker, and what's happened to Oscar's personal style and feel for the surface of the road and just being a natural racing driver. I think that has gone down, weighed down by the amount of telemetry that's being thrown at him, and has been thrown at him ever since he's been down mentally or morally. And I think that's part of the problem. I think because there's so much information, he hasn't been able to just shrug it all off and just go out there and say, I'm in the race car again, I can enjoy myself and have some fun. It's all, oh, well, if Lando's doing here, I better brake here, I better turn in here, better get a high minimum speed there, whatever it is. And racing hasn't become the pleasure that it should be because there's so much stuff going on. And that's all part of being a Formula One driver in 2025. There's so much information and there's so many conflicting ideas and thoughts on what to do that actually that business of just putting down the visor, getting in the race car and breathing again has gone away. It's gone away from Oscar. And I think that's what's happened. McLaren have let that happen, not because they wanted it to happen, but because that's the way they are as a team. They have all that information. The more information, the better. We're very good at getting information. Information, data, telemetry. Got to use it. But there's a limit to what a human being can do, especially if you're a laid-back Aussie human being that actually probably isn't that interested in all that rubbish and just wants to drive the race car. And, he's not doing that. Let's see. As we've had 2 weeks since Brazil. Again, it was not a great race. It was a terrible race for him. And I think he should feel very slighted that the team haven't appealed that penalty. We've seen teams do that in the past. I'm not sure what the remedy would be, but I think they should have said something on his behalf, because as I've attempted to point out, as Mark Slade has very clearly pointed out, Oscar was not guilty of a penalty in Brazil. And that point has not been echoed by McLaren, and that's not a good thing. So we'll see what happens in Vegas. It's easy to say we'll see what happens in Vegas, but there has been that 2 weeks hiatus. It may have worked even more against Oscar. He may be thinking, I've just had enough of all this rubbish. I'm just going to get in the car. Don't talk to me, anybody. Let me be a racing driver again. And we may see a great Oscar Piastri coming out the other side. Let's see. This Araprera 3678. Hi, Peter. Is Suresh Hoffman the GOAT of asking you YouTube live questions? He does seem to ask very good questions, doesn't he? Too many goats out there. Yeah, I quite like goats actually as animals. I think they're lovely animals, to be honest. We have quite a lot of them here in Spain. Most of them look a little bit moth-eaten, but they are there and they are doing their duty and they're looking good. So we saw a fox the other day. Thought I was seeing things, but there was this lovely fox just in front of us at night, coming up to Cat Corner, which is a bit ominous for all the cats, because there's this roundabout where there's an old sort of, I don't know what it was, sort of big garage thing, completely empty, where a lot of the stray cats where we live have bed down for the night, and there was this fox around. Didn't linger to see what was going to happen. I think foxes chase cats, don't they? Or vice versa. Certainly chase chickens, I don't know. I asked Dexter for his opinion, and he sort of yawned and went back to sleep, so he wasn't that interested. Lou Camboni, 2051. Hi, Peter. Thanks for sharing your Formula One knowledge. Question 1, Adrian Newey. There must be plenty of aerodynamicists around the world, I guess. What makes him so good in Formula One? Well, yeah, I'm Peter Wright, who we just sadly lost, one of the other great aerodynamicists. But and he had a lot in common with Adrian, I think, because just like Adrian, he wasn't just an aerodynamics boffin. He was a racer. And Peter Wright had all these things that he did, from active ride to flying saucers to old aircraft. Just a wonderful, wonderful guy, and I really miss him already. And Newey the same. Newey isn't just an aerodynamics boffin. He's a race engineer as well, a race engineer extraordinaire. Give him a clipboard and a pen and a stopwatch. He'll be on the pit wall engineering a car, and he'll be going through setups, and he'll be thinking about strategy and tyres and tyre management. He'll do that with the best of them. Plus, he's a racing driver in his own right. He's very quick and does a very good job, and spends his money wisely on very nice classic racing cars and endurance cars, sports cars. And he just loves motor racing. He loves building Tamiya model kits. You know, he's much more than just an aerodynamics boffin. People, I'm not sure Adrian, in the same way Patrick Head never really liked all the jokes about him still working on the old-fashioned drawing board with his pencil. You know, Patrick didn't think it was very funny to make a joke about that. I don't think Adrian does either. I think Adrian loves his drawing board and he loves his pencil, and he knows that he can do things on that he could never reproduce in front of a screen on a computer with the CFD, and that he can do the complete car. And that's the way he's always done it. And good luck to him. So that's what makes him so good. Of course, he has a very, very good feel for aerodynamics, but he hasn't always been the first on the grid with some new aerodynamic breakthrough. He's had plenty of them. But the twin nose thing was a Sauber thing, wasn't it? It wasn't an Adrian thing. The high nose, actually. And, with the two things in the wing at the bottom. And you could argue, the Braun double diffuser. Adrian says he had that, he knew that, and Charlie Whiting had said, no, it'll be illegal, don't run it. And so they didn't. And then he gave the nod to Braun. But we'll never know if that story is true or not. But the point is, Braun had it and not Adrian. Adrian, since then, the more they've tried to control the aerodynamics with more and more rules and ban this and ban that, and you've got to have a deflector doing this and a front wing end plate doing that, the more Adrian actually has been able to show his talent. He's been able to squeeze more and more out of these tiny, tiny details on the car. So it'll be fascinating to see what he comes up with on the Aston Martin. It'll probably look pretty similar, I guess, but it'll all be in the detail, and it'll be still, and he'll know that. And he'll say, right, the days of me being able to do anything too dramatic are over. It's all about detail now, which is what Adrian loves anyway. And I remember, the Williams FW14, which was effectively the first it was the first Adrian Newey Williams design with Patrick Head, director of engineering. So it was an unbelievable combination. Then Paddy Lowe working on the active ride side of it. The 19A, which was the passive ride car, when we were at the first few races in Brazil and South Africa, Brazil, yeah, I think it was Brazil, to completely fog there. The boys, my race team and test team, nobody could believe how difficult it was to fit the pieces together particularly around all the suspension parts, because Adrian's margin was so small and so tiny on every little part of the car, and it had to be absolutely perfect by the time it came from, whether it was the machine shop, the fab shop, whatever, or the kitting shop even, in terms of exhaust stuff. Everything had to be perfect, and if it was a millimetre out, it was an all-nighter getting it to fit. And that was a new standard. John Barnard had been like that at Ferrari, and Adrian was doing it, taking it to another level, I think, in 91 at Williams. And so it goes on today. Still you look at an Adrian Newey car, and you look, every precise detail is just wonderful. So yeah. But he's a racer above all else. He's a racer, and he understands racing, and he likes hanging out with racing drivers, and he likes working with very fast racing drivers. And I suspect he's got a great bond with Fernando Alonso now, which is going to be spectacular to watch in 26. Lou Chamboni, 2051, same question. Q2, are there any other names in Formula One we should be looking out for? The chief designer at McLaren did a fair job. Well, I mean, Rob Marshall, who was the first guy Adrian hired when he went to Red Bull, I think, pretty much so from Benetton, is doing a great job at McLaren. A similar guy in a way. He's not so much of a specialist in any area as Adrian, but very much a racer, very good feel for Formula One in general, and for all aspects of the car. I've always said Patrick Head could have designed his own engine if he needed to. Could have done an engine from scratch. I'm not sure that's the case today with the way, well, it probably is. I mean, there's so many componentry parts. Probably he could. I suspect Adrian probably could. I'm not sure Rob Marshall could. I suppose that's the difference. But I think Adrian probably could. Rob, I'm not so sure. But yeah, I mean, and he obviously is getting the best from the Aero team at McLaren. A lot of which is ex-Adrian, ex-Red Bull as well. So I would rate him very highly, actually. And Yeah, Rob Marshall's an easy guy to work with too. He's different from. I mean, Adrian's not easy because he's a perfectionist, and he's not. I wouldn't have said hanging out and social small talk is Adrian's cup of tea. It's not. Whereas I imagine Rob is, a more as a softer human being probably, and very nice guy to have around as well. So yeah, Rob Marshall, you're right to mention McLaren. Max 790. On one lap speed, Lewis has been quicker than Bottas, Rosberg, Kovalainen, but slower than Alonso, Russell, Leclerc as teammates. He won his titles with slower teammates, proving two quick drivers doesn't work. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there are exceptions to all those examples you've given there, so it's not necessarily a proof, but it's a suggestion. You're right that if you've got a driver, if you're Max Verstappen and you've got Sergio Perez in the other car, that's a perfect combination. Perez is quick enough to win races, quick enough to do a lot of the data sim work, good enough to do a lot of the sponsorship work in terms of his persona, but not quick enough really to give, to trouble Max on any given Sunday afternoon. So he's the perfect guy. And as Lewis had those perfect guys, Bottas, I think, was the nearest to that. Rosberg was a bit too quick and a bit too clever. Kovalainen, yeah, not really given a real opportunity to show it, but he could have developed into being the perfect Lewis foil, I think. Is he slower than Alonso? I would have said, given that it was Lewis's first year at McLaren in Formula One, and obviously Alonso's first year at McLaren, I think Lewis was super quick that year, and I think that was the reason Alonso left, because there were races where he thought, what is going on here, or qualifying sessions. So I don't think it's fair to say that he's got beaten by Alonso in the same car. Russell, yes, post Abu Dhabi 21, the car was a shock to Lewis, plus there was the shock of Abu Dhabi 21, plus Russell was super quick and hungry, so you're not the right teammate for him to have at that point of his career, no doubt about that. And now Leclerc, well, a different thing. Lewis, back end of his career now, going to Ferrari. I don't know what his aspirations were. I don't know what the aspirations were of all the Lewis fans out there who want him to win every race, but he was never, ever going to go to Ferrari and blow Charles Leclerc away, in my opinion. And I said it at the time, and I stand by it now. There was no way. Leclerc is very, very quick, very, very good, and he knows the team. So how was Lewis going to go and beat him? It was never going to happen. So I don't think it necessarily proves that, but I do agree with you, having a slower driver who, in the case of, I don't think Yuki Max is the right combination because he's not doing enough to be near Max, but Bottas was a good one for Lewis, and I think Perez was a good one for Max. And I think Hajjar will be a good one for Max because he's very quick, but he knows he's got to learn, and he'll have some areas where he's still a bit rough, and he'll learn from those. But he's good enough to do the job alongside Max, and he'll do a good job, I think, as Max's right-hand man. This Rapera 3678. Hi Peter, would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck? Not sure what that means actually. I need to think about that. I mean, probably one horse-sized duck, I would imagine. 100 ducks sounds a bit over the top. I'd rather not fight any ducks. I love ducks. Max 790. Peter, Brazil showed there are levels to short corner driving. Max looked very different to Kimi or Lewis when he was behind them. Would you class Kimi as a short corner driver or hybrid like Lewis? I think Kimi has that feel, and he has the natural touch to enable him to want to get into a corner a bit earlier and extend the straight going in, and extend it on exit as well, and get the car rotated at a point where it's the least possible downside, and he's not worrying about high minimum speed or low minimum speed. He's not worrying about minimum speed. I think he's got all of that. But I think he might have got a bit of a shock when he realized how much more Max was doing that. If he was able to see it, I don't know if he was. Probably in the mirrors he wasn't aware of it. So he probably still doesn't know, I would imagine. He might have watched it on TV. He might think, what's going on there? I thought I turned in early. He may have thought that. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know. But is he a hybrid driver? I don't, as I said, from F2 days, I don't think he's got that same touch and feel yet on medium and fast corners. I think he doesn't drive them the way he drives slow corners. And that's the weird thing about Kimi. I've never seen a driver like that before. And I think he's getting better, but I think part of the problem is George is his yardstick for fast and medium speed corners. And George is super quick there. Nothing short about his corners. He's just mega quick. And so I think that's the path that Kimi's taking. And it's resulting in a few incidents and hairy moments. And in that sense, I wouldn't call him a hybrid. I would just say he's an unfinished product at the moment, hopefully going in the right direction, but he needs to be a bit careful about where the George stuff is going to take him on medium and high speed corners. Bear in mind that there aren't that many medium speed, high speed corners in Formula One these days compared with slow corners, so he's in pretty good shape in terms of the balance of power, but nonetheless, to be a complete driver, he needs to stop looking at what George is doing and start to feel the same way on fast corners as he does on the slow ones. So that's how I see him. Whereas Lewis, is he a hybrid driver? He kind of is. Yeah, he's not really hybrid. He's just like when he's got a really good front end and the back end's behaving itself, he's almost the old Lewis again. But show him a bit of understeer, a bit of graining on the left or right front, give him a bit of instability at the rear, and he's suddenly back where he was in 2022. And that's not hybrid either. That's more Lewis's sort of, a little bit here, back away here, going forward, then back away. And it's, whereas Charles will just drive the way he wants to drive, regardless of what the car is like, and wring the best from it on one lap, ultimately. So another question. Well, lots of questions here. Thank you very much, everybody. This Repera again. On a more serious note, do you think the so gimmicky nature of what racing and overtaking seems like it will be next year's regulations will mean the truly talented drivers won't shine? I've got a reflection coming in from a gap in the blind here, reflecting off a photograph of, looks like me in a Metro Championship race at Thruxton, actually. I'm sure the sun will move quite quickly, but that's what's going on. That's why you can see that light. I think more and more Formula One is going in the direction of not allowing the great drivers to shine and having, if everybody was in the midfield now and scrapping and overtaking and hitting one another, I think the powers that be would love it, wouldn't they? Otherwise, they'd be creating circuits which flatter the talents of drivers like Max and Charles. But they create circuits that don't do that, and they do all they can with artificial aids and tyres and everything else to make sure that they're limiting the way a Charles or a Max can show their talent. And that's because they think it's better TV, and therefore they're going to make more money out of it. Not good, is it? Anyway, that's the world in which we live. There's still little pieces, though, which we try to bring out on this channel, which enable us to touch some of the genius of these great drivers. And in a way, finding those little nuggets of genius is quite fun because it means you've really got to look at the detail. Whereas, in the old days, you could look at Ayrton Senna disappearing in the wet at Donington in 93, or Jim Clark winning at Spa in 65 in the pouring rain. You'd say, oh, wow, there's a great win. These days, you can't necessarily say there's a great win without looking at what's going on in the tiny detail. Somiran Chandok. Hey, I wonder if that's his brother. Thank you, Peter, for all your handiwork and hard work and invaluable insight. Thank you very much. Anyway, best wishes to you. Thank you very much. Hillary MBA. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well and all the family. Yeah, very good. Another good weekend. Young Jack Windsor. Another tournament. This time it was a Murcia Federation Spanish round, golf championship round, and he finished second, which was good. beaten by 2 strokes, which annoyed him, but he did very well, played beautifully. And so, yeah, as a family, we've had a lot going on. With regards to Oscar, who might lose the championship to Lando? How will his reputation be perceived in the paddock, and will this cost his future? Well, actually, I don't think it'll harm his reputation in the paddock, because if Lando, breezes into the championship now on the back of his Mexican and Brazilian success and the momentum he has, and let's say he has another good race in Vegas, and he starts to pull away, I don't think many people in the paddock would say, "Oh, Oscar's a guy we need to avoid because he's terribly up and down, and 1 minute he's great, the next minute he's terrible." Most people in the paddock would think, yeah, McLaren were always going to sort of put everything behind Lando, and the momentum was always going to be behind Lando. Oscar's showed his pace, he's really quick. Put another way, if for whatever reason a vacancy suddenly came up at Ferrari, Mercedes, or Red Bull, and Oscar was available, which I think he would be, I think all 3 of those teams would put Oscar pretty near the top of their list of drivers to get still, for sure. I don't see, unless I'm really misjudging my colleagues in Formula One, I think that people still have a lot of respect for him. ALVZ04, do you think Red Bull will suffer with the low grip conditions during this weekend? Probably. As Mark's pointed out, Max wasn't mega slow in Singapore. He was actually quite quick. Given the right tyre choice, he could have been very quick. And it's the same Pirelli compounds. Let me just check. I think it's the first time. Don't go away. I'm just going to check on that. I think it's the first time we've had the compound range that we had in Singapore. No, we had it it's the first time since Singapore we've had this exact range of Pirelli compounds. So they're quite soft. It's not the softest, but it's it's pretty soft. So in theory, Red Bull should be able to work on the tyres. They've had enough time to think about it, but you never know. I mean, if Max doesn't have a front end and they got to compromise the car from lap 1 just to get the front end to work, then we know they're going to be in trouble all weekend, really. We'll see. But it's a funny race, Vegas. I'm trying to sound enthusiastic about it, but I mean, it is a bit of a it's a bit of a DRS straight, overtake, avoid trouble type race. And in that sense, Max, assuming he qualifies near the front and keeps away from the first corner accident, he'll be all right. He could have a good race. But don't get too excited about it, because temperatures will be an issue. They brought the timing of the sessions and the races a couple of hours earlier now, which means it's not going to be quite as cold either, which will, in theory, be good. I don't know. It's all a bit boring, isn't it, when you have to worry about whether they're going to get tyre temperature or not. Hola, Peter and chat. Summer Dragon. Viva Las Vegas. Let's go. Yeah, I'm not sure the Viva Las Vegas is the best Las Vegas that Mark Slade was describing at 3 o'clock in the morning with the cigarette butts and the vomit on the floor of the lobby by the poker machines as they're going up to the hotel rooms. But anyway, I'm sure there's a side to everything. Jesse Wessels 5291. Hi Peter, question about Lewis. He can see all the data and lines, braking points and minimum speed in the corners from Leclerc, right? Leclerc, I think you mean, do you? Why can't he just adjust to that? Because it's not a question of I mean, that's what Oscar's kind of doing with Lando. Look what a mess he's in. He's looking at Lando's stuff and thinking, oh, he's quicker than me, I better start doing that. And because every driver is different. Every driver relies ultimately on the feel of the car. Put aside telemetry, put aside data, the headset, radio. Every driver, when he goes out, waits to feel the car. I remember chatting to Lewis once at a Barcelona test, the first night of the first day of the test. And I said, how'd it go? And he said, well, at least I feel like I can still do it. Well, that's quite a good comment. You still got the feel. It's the feel of the first time you don't have to put your feet down on a bicycle. It's that feel of, hey, I can hold the slide. Yeah, I can do this. I can whip the car around. I can do that. And every driver is different. And one of my one of the things, and a colleague of mine, similar, one of the questions I love to ask a driver, if I've yet to get to know them and know much about them, is what they like to feel in a car. Do they like to feel the front end, the back end, the loaded rear? What is it that they need to feel in order to feel as if they've got the corner sorted? And it's, most of them say, well, back, right rear, front rear, but they don't really think about it very much. But they know it's something that they do feel, and it's not something that's talked about very much as a result. And in my opinion, that's really important. Every driver is different, and so it's hopeless for Lewis to look at another driver's telemetry if he wants to sort out where he maybe is losing time. What he has to do is feel the surface of the road and drive naturally, like Lewis Hamilton. That's exactly what I've been saying about Oscar Piastri. And it's very easy to get inundated with data and information that tell you how to drive. And the engineers do it a lot. Have a look at braking a little bit later into turn 4 and have a look at the minimum speed, turn 12. Okay, we'll do. It's like they're breaking the corner down into so many segments that it's almost as if they're treating the driver as if he's a robot, which he isn't. He's an emotional human being with soft limbs and joints, and everybody is different. Every racing driver is slightly different one from another. Even the great drivers are different in the way they hold the steering wheel, the way they feel the gears, the way they feel the braking point, the way they apply the pedal pressures. And so it's critical, and this is where Max is so good, to isolate all the stuff you need in order to get the best from the car from what you as a racing driver then do in the racing car. Michael was very good at that as well. Carlos Reutemann used to get a bit confused. Nigel was very good at that. Senna was very good at that. Nicky was very good at combining the two and trying to make his job a bit easier. Prost similarly kind of learnt that talent from Nicky and lost a bit of pace as a result. But if you're talking about truly quick racing drivers, none of them are relying on data. They're all relying on feel and sensitivity and knowing the way to do the corner given the tools they have at their hand. And it may be that their car has got terrible traction, and whatever they do, it makes no difference to the wheel spin that they're starting to get out of corners. And the really great racing drivers will then drive the lap to make sure that they're minimizing the drama of the traction, and they'll do that. As Nigel once said, I don't need traction control, it's my right foot. That sums it up, actually, in many ways. So, yeah, Lewis probably is guilty of all that stuff, but I just wish he would, turn off everything and just be Lewis Hamilton racing driver. But as I said before, the limitation of that, and now we're getting back to the human thing again, the limitation of that is that he is 40 years old. He's not 21. And when you're 40, it's nothing to do with the physical decline. It's to do with your mental progression and the way you think about things in a more logical way. There's more of a win or lose in everything you do. And everything you're about to do, you think about the consequences or not. And because there's more thought process involved, I think that is slowing Lewis down. Or it's slowing down his ability just to breathe fresh air and drive the racing car, regardless of how much information or not he's getting from Charles Leclerc. So, yeah, another good question. Thank you very much. Tiger9. Hi, Peter. My day is made when I hear your insights. Well, thank you very much, Tiger. It's nice to hear. Should Piastri concede and focus on getting second place? There's a chance Max may surpass him if he's not careful. Well, I think to think of anything other than trying to win every race would be folly for Oscar Piastri, because, yeah, of course he's got to beat Max, but equally he wants to win the championship. And I can tell you now, you don't get many chances to win a world championship. Even if you're behind on points now, 3 races to go, it's still a big opportunity for him that he may never get at any time in his career. So he needs to maximize everything he's got to beat Lando Norris. That's the way, in my opinion, that's the only way for him to go into the last 3 races. The minute you start thinking about, I'm going to finish second behind Lando now, every race. That's the minute you really go in decline. You can't do that. As I said, the tennis analogy is when you start to think, oh, well, I've got this match won. He's gone off for a 10-minute injury break. He's got a big bandage on his knee. I don't need to try as hard. And the other guy always wins. You never, ever do anything other than try to win every race. Crazy not to do that. Impossible not to, really. Very difficult to race to finish second. Michael did it in Malaysia 99. But he did it to let Irvine win, obviously. But all he wanted to do was finish in front of Mika Hakkinen. So that it was more that. It wasn't, I want to finish second. It was, I want to beat Mika. And he did. He did a great job. It's not an easy thing to do when you know you can go quicker and maybe win the race. Zishan Afsar. Peter, if Max was in the McLaren this season, do you think the title would already be wrapped up? Do you think when you win it once, it becomes easier to keep winning the World Championship if you're in the hunt? I think when you've won it once, it's like road dust. It's like everything else that happens. When you got your first pole, you know how kind of to approach qualifying. You use the same system sort of thing, and the way you warm up the tyres or whatever it is, within the parameters of what that circuit and those tyres require, and how much steering you actually put into the zigzag, for example. I don't think winning a championship necessarily makes it easier to win the next one. Every year is very difficult, very, very challenging, different challenges as well. And I think if you go into it thinking, well, I won the championship, I know how to do it now, that's a rocky road to disaster. So if Max was in a McLaren, yeah, I think he would have clinched the championship well, it depends who's in the other car, of course. If Charles Leclerc was in the other car, it wouldn't be so easy. Let me think. If George is in the other car, it wouldn't have been so easy. But anybody else, I think, yeah, he would have won the championship by, I don't know, Austin probably. Mexico, as he did last year. So, or was it Vegas last? No, Vegas, I think he clinched it last year. So, yeah, I think Max would have walked it in the McLaren this year. Absolutely walked it. Because he is he's a step ahead of both Oscar and Lando as a racing driver in terms of pace, in terms of everything he brings to the package. And I'm not sure McLaren would disagree with that. I'm not sure anyone would disagree with that. Probably Lando and Oscar would be the only two. But yeah, Max would walk it in a McLaren this year for sure. Ben says the GOAT. I'm sure you're referring to one of your colleagues there asking questions. Alves04, which drive was superior for you? Interlagos 24 or Interlagos 25? We're talking about Max now. Yeah, well, it's a shame it didn't rain in 25, isn't it? Because then you would have had a real comparison. I think 24, just. I mean, 24 is a little, well, I mean, I was going to say, the safety car kind of helped a little bit, but then it helped in 25 as well. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, actually. If you had to nominate one of those two races, which was Max's greatest drive, greater of the two, 24 or 25? I'd probably say because of the rain, 24, probably, just. But that's not to demean 25, which was pretty good, wasn't it? Rao 5160, when did you realise that Mansell was different compared with his peers as you believed in him from the start? Well, thanks for recognising that, A. And B, literally the first time I saw him drive, which was Thruxton Formula 3 March 1978. It was his first race in the factory March. He had hired for 5 races only as a result of remortgaging his house in Hall Green, Birmingham, he and his wife Roseanne. And it was enough to pay for 5 drives. It was a plain white March. And I went down to Thruxton because John Thornburn, who I'd got to know in 77 pretty well in Formula 5000, no, 76 actually, Formula 5000 when he ran Bob Evans, McKechnie Racing. John was a great guy, used to manage Trevor Taylor, Jim Clark's teammate at Lotus in the early 60s. And because of that Jim Clark connection, I became very good friends with John and Trevor actually as well. And one, just as an aside, John always used to go on about how good Colin Chapman was and how quick he was as a racing driver. And Trevor also echoed that. He said, yeah, Colin Chapman was really quick. And we know he had that opportunity to race for Vanwall. Didn't actually race for Vanwall. He practiced the car at Raz. And that was how good he was. He was very quick. But when Colin first saw Jimmy drive, it was like, whoa, this is a different planet here. And that's one of the reasons that combination was so good. Anyway, John rang me back end of 77 when he was running. He'd got to know Nigel in 77. Nigel was doing Formula Ford, the brush fuse gear British Championship. And Nigel won something like 34 races that year in Formula Ford. And he rang me. I was at my desk at Autocar. I can remember it. It was in the morning. He said, oh, hi, Peter, John here. Hey, John, how you doing? He said, Peter, I just want to give you a heads up that I've just seen the best British driver since Jimmy. I said, really? Wow. And it's not Trevor Taylor. No, it's not old Trev. He said, no, it's a guy called Nigel Mansell. He's been racing Formula Ford and he's just about to do Formula 3. You need to get down to Thruxton, watch him this weekend because this guy is seriously good. And so I did. I went straight down to Thruxton that weekend, obviously, and parked myself. I drove around with the clerk of the course before the practice session for Formula 3 and got out at the marshal's post on the outside of the long right-hander. You could do those things in those days. It's just, oh yeah, okay, no worries. So standing there in the marshal's post behind the sleepers there and going around that long, quick right-hander at the back end of the Thruxton circuit, very bumpy. And Nigel through there was just brilliant. Beautiful turn in, slightly earlier than everybody else, missing one bump, going over another bump, but the car was absolutely straight as he went over that bump, that flat part, then a bit more cornering, steering load into the car, just the right rate. Just an absolutely perfect every lap. Just breathtakingly good on a quick corner. So then end of the practice session, got a lift back with the clerk of the course in a Capri, I think it was, and got back to the pits, made my way straight to his little area and went up and introduced myself. And he explained then that, he'd got this car for 5 races and it was critical that he won all 5 races because it was the only way he was going to get the sponsorship to do the full year. And, and I thought, right, I'm going to help this guy as much as I can. As a young journalist at Autocar, I'm going to do all I can. And I started working, not during my working hours, but at night and weekends, writing letters on Nigel's behalf, doing sponsorship proposals, trying to find money for him. And it didn't work that year. I didn't find anything for him that year. And he duly stopped after those 5 races. March, didn't do anything with him, took his money and that was it. And he sat out the rest of the year. And I went up to Hall Green quite a lot, did quite a lot of work with him then, just trying to get sponsorship proposals together and writing letters and stuff and trying to arrange interviews and things. And but luckily over the winter, Dave Price, another great guy, sadly no longer with us, but did a very good job as a race team owner, sort of Ollie Oakes of today really. And he knew how good Nigel was, and he got sponsorship from Unipart to run the Unipart Formula 3 team with Dolomite engines, Triumph Dolomite engines, which were not quick against the Toyotas. And he chose Nigel as his number 2 driver. Brett Riley, the New Zealander, was the number 1, but Nigel was his number 2. And Nigel did a very good job all year in 79. And that was the year when things started to happen. I got Nigel an opportunity to test at Lotus, and I started to make some headway with some sponsorship, and we got Chapman to sign him, and so it went on. But yeah, it all started at Thruxton, on that long, fast corner at Thruxton, which is still there. Still a great corner. I'd love to see Formula 1 cars at Thruxton, or at least Formula 2, and all the Formula 1 drivers running Formula 2 cars there. It'd be excellent. Jack 9B6Z. Peter, can you see Lewis retiring after this season? I can't actually, because 26 is such a question mark. I mean, if he wants to continue, I'm sure his contract is weighted in such a way that he will continue. And in Lewis's mind, he'll be thinking, I'm not enjoying this. This is just not me. On the other hand, we don't know what the new Ferrari is going to be like. Could be as good as the McLaren is this year. So I'm not leaving anywhere. I'm going to hang around and see what that car's like. Thank you very much. If he has a terrible year in 26, and the Ferrari's a dog, excuse me, Dexter, then I think he will retire, yeah. 11th 10, 11th 10, 9170 Max. Max would have 100% wins now, excluding sprints in McLaren. Yeah. Why do you think he wouldn't have won the sprints at McLaren? I think he would have won those too, wouldn't he? But anyway, yeah, he would have loved that car all year. I would love to have seen Max in that car, actually. I'd love to have seen it. Another super chat, actually, before we progress down there. Thank you very much. This is from A Racer 666. I think you started it all. Thank you very much. What kind of training would drivers like Oscar? Oh, we've had that one. Sorry, I'm repeating it. It's just that it suddenly appeared at the top. I guess it's because I've suddenly got to where it is in the real chronology. So, okay. Daniel McCormick, 27. Peter, with ticket sales not going well in Vegas, when will Formula One learn that fans want real racetracks like Indy, Watkins Glen, Laguna Seca? Well, I try not to get involved in all that, because I've got a lot of friends who work at Liberty and they're all good guys, but I suppose they're not the people really making these decisions. And yeah, like you know, I would never, ever have built that street circuit in Vegas the way it is. I would have done what I've been saying they should be doing for about the last 100 years, which is taking advantage of all those wealthy entrepreneurs in Vegas and getting them to build replicas of the Nürburgring and Brands Hatch and Suzuka and the old Spa in the desert near Vegas with runoff area, with all the Formula One pit complexes. You could say, well, that would cost a fortune. But I tell you what, if you look at the number of people queuing up on a daily basis to do laps of the Nürburgring these days, they're making a fortune at the ring, more than they probably ever did running races there on a regular basis. It would be the same in Vegas. You'd go to Vegas to do, I'm going to do Nürburgring, I'm going to do Brands Hatch tomorrow, I'm going to do Suzuka on Thursday, you're going to do whatever great circuit from the past you want to bring into it. Sepang, Malaysia. So many great tracks. Rouen, Reims. You could have all those tracks in the desert. Not only in Vegas, you could have it in the Middle East as well. I don't know why they're not encouraging them to do that. And I've been saying that and counselling that. Nobody's listening. What can I do? That's the solution. But I agree with you, the current circuit. And also, I don't think it's just the current circuit, is it? This whole business of the night race is probably, I mean, Bernie always said street circuits are okay the first year, everybody's all excited. It's the second year you've got to worry about, when all the people who don't like the noise pollution, don't like the light pollution, and certainly don't like the traffic jams involved in street races, all start complaining. And I think that's what we're seeing at Vegas, are we not? Year 3. What is that noise? I think it's the lawnmower. Okay, good one. I better put the mic a bit nearer if I can. Suddenly less rigid than it normally is. What's going on here? That's a bit better. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Vegas, year 3, it's expensive and it's annoying and it's not going to go away because Liberty have bought a lot of land there in Vegas on the Strip for this permanent base. But it's tacky. For me, it's tacky. You know, I would love to see Formula One. For me, Formula One, as you know, is Clermont-Ferrand, it's Suzuka, it's Brands Hatch, it's all these wonderful circuits, it's Rouen, and it's Sepang, and it's Turkey, you know, lots of great tracks. It's not Vegas, and just for the sake of being able to say we're at Vegas. It's a shame. Lucas 12891. Hi Peter, what championship years do you think Lewis won without the best car? For me it would be 08, 17 and 18. You know, there's lots of people out there, aren't there, that think Lewis has only got the results he's got because he always had the best car and he was in the best team, and if he had to drive a bad car and wasn't with the best team, it wouldn't have been anything like as great as he supposedly is. But look at Fangio, poor old Fangio, you know, jumping from team to team to win all those championships. You can't disassociate the team and the car from the driver. And I would probably agree with you. 17, 18, 8, 8, yeah, I guess so. But then again, I would say in 8, it was a very good car in 8. Very good car. And it was always a good car. You can't win a championship unless you're in a very good car. And to say, well, it wasn't as good as, you know, Ferrari, Red Bull, whatever, to me it's very difficult to disassociate the driver from the car in that sort of comparison. What I would say is that if you want to see how good Lewis Hamilton is, for me, maybe his greatest year was 07, when he had Fernando Alonso join the team, admittedly learning McLaren, but Lewis was a rookie, and he looked so good alongside Alonso as a double world champion. And that, to me, is how good Lewis Hamilton is. That's always been my gold standard of when I'm rating Lewis in my mind. I think about that year. I think, wow, yeah, that's Jackie Stewart at BRM in 1965 showing Graham Hill how to do it. And that's, you know, that's what Lewis did. He drove Fernando into distraction to the point where he left the team. Excellent. Not excellent, but sorry, I was reading excellent from the next question. It was a mistake by Fernando, because I wish he'd stayed and he would have won more races had he done so. Jay's 8964. Hi Peter. Thanks for the excellent analysis. Thank you. How impressed are you by Ogier? Only 3 points behind Evans, despite competing in just 10 rallies to Evans' 13. He seems the more deserving champion as a result. Yeah, I mean, you've got to hand it to Ogier. He is, every rally this year, he's been incredibly quick and consistent and reliable, and he recovers from dramas. So, yeah, I think he's, whether he's a more deserving champion, I'd love to see Elfyn Evans win it, actually, because he's been so near. And I love his very shy, unprepossessing approach of just being there because he loves driving a rally car. And I'd love to see him win it. Whether he will, I don't know. It's new, isn't it? The whole Saudi Arabian thing, gravel, and we'll see how it all pans out. For me, the classiest driver still is Terry Neuville in terms of the way he drives the car, his inputs, everything he does with the car. I just love watching the way he drives. He hasn't had a good year. I suspect some of that is the fallout of winning the championship and the very short amount of time there is between Japan and the Monte Carlo rally. Very little time to enjoy it, and I suspect that's had its effect. Also, Hyundai had a very, very difficult year. Only 3 cars against the 4 or 5 of Toyota, so they can do a lot less tyre testing, much less knowledge of the new Hankook tyres. And Terry's made some mistakes as well. And I say that's more of a fallout. But in terms of just watching him, the way he drives the car, he's the guy that I still think he has this lovely, silky smooth approach. And I prefer watching him drive to Ogier, but I have nothing but respect for Ogier, obviously, in terms of his results and what he's achieved. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Kalle Rovanperä in Japanese F3 and then again in Formula 2 and hopefully into Formula 1. I think he's very like Kimi, and he's still young enough to be able to do it. I mean, but if he gets into Formula 1 in 28 with, say, Haas, he'll only be 28. He was born in 2000. Pretty good, isn't it? And he's got 2 World Rally Championships behind him. Excellent. Zishan Afsar again. Peter, do you think Antonelli has the capabilities to properly challenge George Russell for over the season for pace next year? Kimi was saying something about how their relationship will change. I think he does, yeah. I think there are more and more circuits with slow corners. No, that's not true. That's not true. Look at Vegas, look at Saudi Arabia, look at a lot of those tracks. They're all sort of long, straight things. But nonetheless, yes, I do think he'll be very near George. And obviously, as I've always been saying, it's no problem being mates with your teammate if you're not vying for the World Championship. But if you've got a race-winning car and a chance to win a Grand Prix, the guy you want to beat most is your teammate. It's just an obvious point. And that's why I keep progressing from that to saying, if you're Max, you therefore don't want a guy that is capable of beating you and distracting you. You want Sergio Perez or maybe Isaac Hadjar. And George will probably think Kimi. I mean, he's been talking a little bit sort of condescending is the wrong word, but it's a bit like Fernando with Lance Stroll. Oh, I'm really pleased for Lance and I've been helping him here, and Lance, tell Lance to do this. And George is, I'm so proud of the way Kimi's going, but you won't be too proud of Kimi when Kimi starts beating him on a regular basis, if indeed that happens. But that's where it'll change, if it's a race-winning thing. But if they're racing for 4th place, it doesn't make any difference. Forget it, who cares? But if it's for race wins, they've got a great car, of course their relationship will change. Absolutely. for sure. Anyone that doesn't think that doesn't know what they're looking at. Going to have to go soon, guys. Chuck V. Lady Slav 300. Hi, Peter. What championship years do you think Lewis won without the best car? For me, for me, it'd be none. Oh, well, somebody. There you go. There's somebody saying he always had to have the best car to win. Well, I don't agree with that. Is now a McLaren Mercedes factory team? What's that mean? I'm not quite sure. Obviously, they're a customer of Mercedes who have to give exactly the same engines by the rules to their customers. So, yeah, and it's not hurting them at all because of that rule. I mean, if it was the old days, they'd just give them a few dud engines and suddenly the factory team would be blowing McLaren away. Those days are gone. Max Flashart's probably his solution for getting the tyres to work in Vegas. 4 burnouts instead of 3. Okay. Well, we got all the ingredients from Mark, didn't we? That one about DRS on the outlap's quite interesting too, isn't it? Run the DRS. Chuck V. Lady Slav says 6300, bring back grid girls so they stop having to film the girlfriends. Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that whole grid girls thing, just talking about it seriously, it was one of the first things Liberty did, wasn't it? Very politically correct. And yet we see strangely political things they're doing, inviting presidents and stuff like that to races. And certainly they don't seem to have a problem with Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, but they do have a problem with grid girls. I don't really get that either. Anyway, I don't want to get involved with that because it's a minefield, isn't it? And I'm more interested in Formula One and short corners and rates of input. One Drew C. Power for the rust bracket hookup. That guy's on a level. Well, I was going on about him. I mentioned him in the last live stream. I think I put out a short about it. Somebody said to me, you know, Peter, how do we survive having to put up with all this stuff that's, you know, the movie and Drive to Survive? How do we real passionate? How do we continue to love Formula One in a pure way? I guess is the right way to be a purist. How do we do that? And I said, well, if you need a fix, go to Rust Bucket Motorsport. And I stand by that. Just to those that don't know, and I don't know who Rust Bucket is any more than you will, because I'm sure he doesn't want his face or his name to be visible on any YouTube video, because who knows where it might put him. But he's got the talent. He's got the talent, absolutely no doubt at all, to win World Rally Championships at the highest level, at Rally 1 level. He's very, very talented, incredibly quick. He tried to get into rallying, as I understand it, and into Rally 2 sort of thing. He obviously got somewhere up the ladder, but then ran out of money. And rather than just continue to fight it, he started this YouTube channel called Rust Bucket, in which he basically takes rust buckets, whether it be an old Passat or an old Honda Civic or an old Chevy pickup truck, and he thrashes them like you would not believe through gravel forest roads and sometimes on tarmac. His car control is just brilliant. As I said, you know, if Max and Charles and those guys knew about it, if they know about it, for sure they're watching it because it's so much fun. And if you haven't seen it, have a look. It'll give you, you know, the boost you need to get through the day. This guy shows that a Chevrolet pickup truck can still be fun, an automatic one at that. And he puts it at angles that I think nobody in the entire history of Chevrolet pickup trucks has even dreamed of, let alone any of the Hollywood people that try to use cars for filming in chases. They should be using Rust Bucket to do everything. Right, I'm going to have to finish it here, guys. Jays8964. Hi, Peter. I'm a Sainz fan, but questioning his assessment of risk this season, given the constant contact. Monza, Mexico, Austin, Brazil, and more. What advice would you give him? Thanks. Well, yeah, I would never have advised him to go to Williams in the first place. And I think he should have kept the Ferrari drive. I think he was very good as the number 2 or the other driver in the other car alongside Charles. Perfect team. But if he was fired, which he was, I would have put him in the Sauber, now to become Audi, because he would have gone into that year thinking organic growth, not expecting much, might have the odd mega result, just getting to know the team, working with the Audi people. This is where I'm going to be the rest of my life with this Audi brand. Really do it well in a timely way. Instead of which he went to Williams, where the pressure was on straight away to have to beat Alex Albon and show that he was Carlos Sainz, which was never going to be easy. And that has led to a bit of risk taking, as you say, compounded by Williams not being able to run two cars perfectly mechanically, things going wrong in a way they don't at some of the better teams, certainly at Ferrari. Compounded again by qualifying in the midfield where all the accidents are anyway. And he was getting impatient and wanted to show that he was Carlos Sainz, Grand Prix winner. And it was all part of going to Williams. It was inevitable. And I don't know why he did it. I still don't know why he did it. So there we go. Last question and last comment is from Max Flashart. And I've got to agree with him on this. It says, hit the like and sub button to support this quality content. Thank you very much, Max. And he says, graining, I'm expecting. I think he's talking about Vegas. Yeah, well, there will be some graining. I'm pretty sure of that. Because when they slide in the cold weather, they do start to grain, and then it's a big drama. Nobody likes graining. So there we are. Big thanks to Jetcraft, OEM Exclusive, to REC Watches, and to Track Ninja for their support of this channel. Wouldn't be able to do what we're doing right now without their support. So please have a look at the description below this video at everything they can do, maybe for you or for friends that you might have. And so yeah, subscribe, like if you like this live stream. And again, thanks for watching. And we'll be back with the normal 3 videos. Friday will be a bit, I don't know, Friday, they'll all be in the morning, won't they? And Friday, I'm not quite sure what we'll learn from Friday, but I guess it'll be something. We'll see. Big thanks to Mark Slade as well for his input, invaluable input. And don't forget, we'll be coming back over the winter with Mark and with Craig to look at the new cars as they come out as well. So watch this space on how we're going to do that. Maybe we'll do it live as a watch along alongside the virtual launch. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Let me know what you think about that idea. Anyway, for now, big thanks for watching. See you soon.